In this video, I'm going to be covering some tips on editing scanned images from your hand drawings so they can look better on your boards. So for this video, I just grabbed a bunch of images online of some various scanned in hand-drawn images just to show you, and walk through some different techniques for each some of these. So these are just the quick selection of some images that I grabbed, and I'll show you how to make these look better. So most times when you scan in a drawing, either your lines won't be as dark as you want them to be, or your background will be too dark and it'll sort of kind of blend in with the lines. So one of the most common type of adjustments you can make to change the background is a levels adjustments. And you can either get to that by going to the adjustments panel and clicking on levels, or if you go to layer, new adjustment layer, and levels. So when that opens up, so there's two main tools that we want to use, and they're these eyedroppers right here. So the black eyedropper here sets the black point in the image. And if we click this, and I'll click on what I think is the darkest part of the image, this will kind of set what black is in the image. So if I click on something that's white, it'll set that to black, as you can see like that. But if I click around and try clicking on the darkest part of the image, that'll set that to black. And that's most apparent in this. If I click on the white dropper, I then click on something that should be white, like this background. So immediately you'll see how we've just made the background brighter, and you can sort of click around in different areas and you can get an idea of how it's adjusting the background to make it more white. The only thing you have to watch out for is sometimes, as we're sampling in this area over here, it's sampling more of a kind of a lighter gray, and depending on how dark you've drawn your lines, it might start to, some of your lines might start to disappear. So it's really just kind of a balancing act of, testing kind of what works, but not going too far. Once you've set the white and the black point, you can also drag this middle slider here, which will kind of adjust the mid-tones. So you can kind of use that to get, maybe pop out more of the hand-drawn lines a bit more. And one of the final changes I'm going to make for this image is a black and white adjustment. So I'm going to click up here and click on black and white, and that'll just make sure that your image is in black and white. It's not as apparent in this image, but sometimes you can kind of see that it's a little slightly maybe blue or green, so that'll make sure that everything is black and white. So I'm going to jump over to my next image, and the background on this is a lot darker, and it's there's not much contrast between parts of the background and the image and the hand-drawn lines, so we're going to try to bring that out. So I'm going to start by bringing up a levels adjustment here. I click my black point and click on what I think is the darkest part of the image, which I think is right around here. And then I'm going to click the white sampling point and click on some part of the background. So already this is looking a whole lot better than it did before and is much more readable. Then I can also experiment with the mid-tone slider and see if that helps at all. On our next image, which is very dark, again I'll apply our levels adjustment. We'll set our black point and then set our white point. Now in the previous images, those were both drawn on grids, but in those cases the grid was black and white, so it's pretty difficult to kind of edit that out, because some of the tools Photoshop uses is targeting either the value, the relative brightness of that, or the hue. In this case, it's a grayscale, so it can't really pull out a color. And many of the edges of the lines in the drawing are at the same value as those grid lines, so it's hard to edit those out. But in this case, the grid lines have a slight hue to them, maybe like a blue or a purple. So one trick that we can apply to this is either going with the black and white here, and then we can mess around with these different color sliders here, which will target these individual colors, and then you can adjust how bright or dark they are. So you can see when I move the cyan slider to the right, how you can see that some of the grid lines, which are kind of in this color range, are getting lighter or darker. You can also try maybe the blue. See, it's having more of an effect, although sometimes you might end up hiding too much if you're drawing. Another way we can do this is if we use a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And what we can do is click on this little hand tool here. And I'm just going to zoom in and pick on kind of a color here of this grid line. And then I'm just going to drag the lightness slider up. And you can see how it's starting to brighten up sort of the grid lines, because it was targeting like a blue purpley color. And then we can try going back to the levels, maybe adjusting the midtones a little bit. And that's probably the best you're going to get out of this image. And jumping over to the next image, this one doesn't look too bad, so we will bring up our levels again. Black, and the image already has a pretty black point, but I'll click on that anyway. And then we'll just set our whites here. Maybe we can try something that's a little bit brighter than what's up here to try to get rid of more of the background, but we don't want to get rid of too much. You can see we just kind of got rid of a little bit of gray in the background, but it's it's difficult to get rid of everything that you want to. In our next image here, again we'll apply our levels. We'll pick our black point. Then we'll pick our white point. In the case of this image, it has a grid with a solid color that's different from our drawing, so we can kind of use that color to our advantage to try to hide the grid. So the first tool I'm going to use is a hue or saturation level adjustment. And I'm going to pick the hand tool here, click on part of the grid, so it'll kind of select the range of color that I just selected. I'm going to bring the lightness up here, and we can see how much it gets rid of that. So it does a pretty good job, but it's still there, so maybe we can try a black and white adjustment layer. So I'm just going to turn the hue and saturation layer off, come up to the adjustments and click on black and white. And the color of this is primarily cyan, so I'm going to try bringing this up here. You can see it seems to be doing a better job than our hue and saturation level. Actually, when we push it all the way, you can actually see the outline of the grid in white, because there's still sort of part of the background that's left there. So I might try moving some of the other sliders around. So that seems to be a pretty good combination there for this. It's you still see the background, but it's still looking much better than it did before. And for our last image here, this is kind of an example of when getting rid of the grid lines goes, exactly right. This image is very clean. It just has black lines, a white background, and a kind of a cyan colored grid. So I can get my hue and saturation tool out, click on the hand drop tool, and then click on the grid, which will select that color. And I'm just going to bring the lightness up here, and you can see that basically got rid of our grid completely. So we turn that off, you can see the grid there, click the layer back on, and then it gets rid of it completely. So that concludes the end of this video. When you're thinking about your drawings, and if you think they're going to be scanned at the end, some things you could do to make them easier to scan is either draw it on a clean piece of paper, because as you can see I could get rid of some of the grid lines on these sample images, but it's hard to get rid of everything. Another thing you could do is just trace over your drawings on a fresh piece of trace paper or vellum, which will produce a much cleaner image than if you had made a lot of revisions or eraser marks on your other original drawing. And generally, the darker that your lines are, the better they're going to read when they're scanned. So drawing something in pen will always look better than drawing something in pencil.